The silence in the church was suffocating as Rebecca Miller stood at the altar in her white gown. The words, "I'm sorry, I can't do this," still echoing through the stunned congregation. Her fiancé, Harold Whitmore, had just left her standing alone before God and everyone in Leavenworth, Kansas, in the spring of 1878. Rebecca's trembling hands clutched her wilting bouquet of wildflowers as the whispers began to ripple through the church. Her mother's anguished gasp cut through the murmurs, and Father Thompson stood awkwardly beside her, Bible still open to the marriage rites. The church doors remained ajar, letting in a sliver of bright May sunshine that seemed to mock the darkness that had just descended upon her life. "Rebecca, dear," her mother finally approached, reaching for her arm. "Let's get you out of here." But Rebecca couldn't move. 6 months of planning, 2 years of courtship with Harold, the son of the town's banker, all gone in an instant. Her future, which had seemed so certain just moments ago, had vanished like morning mist. "I need air," she finally managed to say, pulling away from her mother's grasp. Lifting the hem of her dress, she rushed down the aisle, past the pitying glances and shocked faces of Leavenworth's finest citizens. The whispers followed her, the abandoned bride, the woman not good enough to keep Harold Whitmore's interest. Outside the church, Rebecca gulped the spring air, tears blurring her vision. The town square of Leavenworth spread before her, the usual Saturday bustle continuing despite her world having just collapsed. Wagons rolled by, shoppers entered and exited the general store, and life simply went on, uncaring of her heartbreak. She stumbled down the church steps, not knowing where to go but knowing she couldn't face the reception that would never happen, the guests who had just witnessed her humiliation. Her perfectly coiffed hair was coming loose, pins dropping onto her shoulders as she moved blindly forward. "Whoa there, miss," a deep voice said as she collided with something solid. Strong hands gripped her shoulders to steady her, and Rebecca looked up through her tears into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man before her was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath a well-worn cowboy hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, marking him as someone just arrived in town rather than a wedding guest. "I'm sorry," Rebecca tried to step away, mortified to be seen in such a state. "No harm done," the stranger replied, his eyes taking in her wedding dress, the tears on her cheeks, and the church behind her where people were now spilling out onto the steps, looking in their direction. Understanding dawned in his expression. "Seems like someone made the mistake of a lifetime today." Rebecca swallowed hard, unable to form words. "His loss," the cowboy said with surprising gentleness. Then, with a slight tip of his hat and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, he added, "My gain, if you'd allow it." The boldness of his statement shocked Rebecca out of her stupor. "Excuse me, Xavier Whittaker," he introduced himself, still holding her steady. "Just rode into town looking for work and a fresh start. Seems like you might be in need of the same." Before Rebecca could respond, her father's voice called out from the church steps. "Rebecca, come back inside." Xavier released her but didn't step away. "Looks like you've got decisions to make, miss, but if you want my opinion, running back inside that church isn't the one I'd choose." Rebecca glanced over her shoulder at the gathering crowd, then back at this stranger whose unexpected kindness had momentarily pushed away the crushing weight of her humiliation. "I can't face them," she whispered. "Then don't," Xavier said simply. He gestured to a bay horse tied at a hitching post nearby. "I've got an extra horse. Was planning to sell her, but she could carry you away from here if that's what you want." It was outrageous, scandalous, the kind of offer a proper lady would refuse without a second thought. But Rebecca Miller had just been left at the altar, and propriety had done nothing to prevent the worst day of her life. "I don't even know you," she said, although she didn't immediately dismiss his offer. "No, you don't," he agreed. But sometimes a stranger is exactly what you need when everyone familiar has just watched you fall. He held out his hand. Your choice, miss. I'll be heading to the stables either way. For the briefest moment, Rebecca hesitated. Then she heard her mother's voice join her father's, calling her name with increasing urgency. In that instant, she made her decision. She placed her gloved hand in Xavier's calloused one. Rebecca, she said. Rebecca Miller. His smile widened. Well then, Miss Miller, shall we disappoint that crowd a second time today? Without waiting for further confirmation, Xavier led her across the town square toward the livery stables, away from the church and the life she had planned. Rebecca knew she should be frightened, or at least concerned, but all she felt was a strange sense of liberation, as the weight of expectations fell away with each step she took in her wedding dress, walking beside a cowboy she'd just met. The stable hand's eyes widened comically when they entered, taking in Rebecca's disheveled wedding attire and Xavier's determined expression. Mr. Whittaker, I see you've returned for your horses. Indeed I have, Thomas. And I'll be needing both saddled right away, Xavier replied, dropping a few extra coins into the young man's palm. And perhaps your discretion as well. Thomas pocketed the money with a nod, though he couldn't help stealing curious glances at Rebecca as he moved to prepare the horses. Are you certain about this? Xavier asked her quietly while they waited. I won't think less of you if you change your mind. Rebecca looked down at her wedding dress, now dusty at the hem from their walk across the square. She thought of returning to face the pity and gossip, the arrangements that would need to be canceled, the gifts returned. The thought was unbearable. Where would we go? She asked instead of answering directly. I've taken work at the Simmons Ranch about 10 miles outside town, Xavier explained. Old man Simmons is expanding his operation and needs experienced hands. I could take you to his wife, she's a good woman. Might give you a place to stay while you figure things out. And if she doesn't? Xavier shrugged. Then I'll bring you back to town or wherever else you want to go. You have my word. Before Rebecca could respond, shouts could be heard from the street outside. Her father's voice carried through the stable doors, asking if anyone had seen a bride. Time's up for contemplation, Miss Miller, Xavier said, as Thomas led 2 saddled horses forward. Rebecca gathered her skirts, making a split-second decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Help me up, Mr. Whittaker. Xavier's strong hands encircled her waist, lifting her onto the smaller of the 2 horses. The wedding dress complicated matters, but Rebecca managed to arrange herself side-saddle as best she could. Ever ridden before? Xavier asked, mounting his own horse with practiced ease. Not since I was a girl, she admitted. Just hold tight to the reins and follow my lead, he instructed, then turned to Thomas. If anyone asks, ain't seen nobody but you today, Mr. Whittaker, Thomas assured him, tipping his cap. Xavier nodded gratefully, then led the way out the back entrance of the stables that opened onto a narrow alley. Rebecca's heart pounded as they emerged onto a side street, but Xavier kept them moving at a controlled pace that wouldn't attract undue attention, gradually making their way toward the edge of town. Only when they had left the last buildings of Leavenworth behind, and the open prairie stretched before them, did Xavier allow their horses to break into a gallop. The wind whipped at Rebecca's carefully arranged hair, sending the last pins flying and her veil streaming behind her like a banner. For the first time since Harold had walked away from her at the altar, Rebecca felt something other than shame and heartbreak. As the town receded behind them and her wedding dress billowed around her, she felt wildly, unexpectedly free. The Simmons Ranch lay nestled in a green valley, a collection of sturdy wooden buildings dominated by a 2-story main house. As they approached, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the land. Rebecca's initial burst of courage had faded during the ride, replaced by growing apprehension about what she had done and what awaited her. "Having second thoughts?" Xavier asked, seeming to read her mind. "More like 20th thoughts," she admitted with a nervous laugh. "I've never done anything so impulsive in my life." "Sometimes the most important choices are made in an instant," he replied. "But don't fret. Mrs. Simmons is fair-minded. At worst, you'll have a place to stay tonight before deciding your next move." As they rode into the ranch yard, activity around them slowed as ranch hands stopped to stare at the unusual sight of a woman in a wedding dress arriving on horseback. Rebecca felt her face flush under their curious gazes. A stout woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from welcoming to confused as she took in the scene. "Xavier Whittaker, I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow," she called out, approaching as they dismounted. Her eyes widened as she looked at Rebecca. "And I certainly wasn't expecting, whatever this is." "Mrs. Simmons," Xavier greeted her with a respectful nod. "This is Miss Rebecca Miller. She's found herself in need of temporary sanctuary, and I took the liberty of suggesting your hospitality might extend to her." Mrs. Simmons crossed her arms, her shrewd eyes moving between them. "Is that right? And why would a young woman in a wedding dress need sanctuary, I wonder?" Rebecca stepped forward, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look, her hair wild, her expensive dress wrinkled and dusty. "My wedding was called off today, Mrs. Simmons, rather abruptly and publicly. I couldn't face everyone. Mr. Whittaker offered me an alternative to the humiliation." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Left you at the altar, did he?" Rebecca nodded, tears threatening again. "Men," Mrs. Simmons muttered disapprovingly. "Well, come inside then. You look like you could use a cup of tea and perhaps something stronger." She turned her attention back to Xavier. "Mr. Simmons is in the north pasture with the men. He'll want to speak with you about tomorrow's work." Xavier tipped his hat. "I'll see to the horses first, then find him." He turned to Rebecca. "You'll be all right from here." There was genuine concern in his eyes, and Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude for this stranger who had, in the space of an afternoon, shown her more consideration than her fiancé had in their final weeks together. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Whittaker, for everything," as Mrs. Simmons led her toward the house. Rebecca glanced back once to see Xavier leading both horses toward the stables, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. She wondered if their paths would cross again, or if, having delivered her safely to the ranch, his obligation to her was complete. The interior of the Simmons home was modest but comfortable, with solid furniture and homey touches that spoke of a woman who took pride in her domain. Mrs. Simmons directed Rebecca to a chair at the kitchen table and busied herself with the tea kettle. "So," the older woman said, setting out cups, "you want to tell me the full story? Or would you prefer I not pry?" Rebecca sighed. "There isn't much to tell. Harold, my fiancé, simply said he couldn't go through with it, right there at the altar, then he walked out of the church." "Leaving you to face everyone alone," Mrs. Simmons finished, shaking her head in disgust. "Coward." "I don't know what I was thinking, leaving with Mr. Whittaker," Rebecca admitted. "I've never done anything so reckless." Mrs. Simmons set a steaming cup of tea in front of her, then added a splash of whiskey from a bottle she produced from a cupboard. "Sometimes reckless is exactly what's called for." She sat down across from Rebecca. "What would have happened if you'd stayed?" Rebecca wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Everyone would have pitied me. My parents would have been mortified. The town would talk of nothing else for months." "And what will they say now that you've run off with a cowboy?" Mrs. Simmons asked bluntly. Rebecca winced. "I suppose they'll say even worse things." "Probably," the older woman agreed. "But here's the question that matters. Which version of events can you live with?" Rebecca took a sip of the tea, the whiskey burning pleasantly as it went down. "I don't know yet," Mrs. Simmons nodded. "Fair enough. You can stay here tonight longer if needed. We can find you some proper clothes, and in the morning, things may seem clearer." "Thank you," Rebecca said sincerely. "I can work to earn my keep. I'm quite good with numbers. I kept the books for my father's hardware store." "We'll discuss all that tomorrow," Mrs. Simmons replied. "For now, let's get you out of that dress. It's lovely, but it doesn't seem to fit the occasion anymore." Later, wearing a borrowed nightgown and robe, Rebecca sat on the edge of the small bed in the Simmons guest room. Her wedding dress hung on a hook on the back of the door, a ghostly reminder of the day's events. Outside her window, she could hear the distant sounds of men talking and laughing as they returned from their day's work. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Miller, Mrs." Simmons' voice called. "If you're decent, there's someone here to see you." Curious, Rebecca tightened the robe around herself and opened the door. To her surprise, Xavier Whittaker stood in the hallway beside Mrs. Simmons, his hat in his hands. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his eyes meeting hers briefly before looking away respectfully. "I wanted to check that you were settled in comfortably before I retired to the bunkhouse." "That's very kind of you," Rebecca replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'm quite comfortable, thank you." "Good," he nodded. "I'll be working here for the foreseeable future, so if you need anything—" "You'll see her at breakfast, Mr. Whittaker," Mrs. Simmons cut in with good-natured firmness. "That's enough visiting for tonight." Xavier smiled. "Yes, madam." He glanced at Rebecca once more. "Good night, Miss Miller." As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him, "Mr. Whittaker." He looked back. "Thank you again for what you did today." His expression was warm. "As I said, Miss Miller, his loss my gain." With that, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Rebecca to wonder at the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place, and to this man who had stepped into her life at its lowest point and offered her a way forward. The Simmons ranch awoke with the dawn. Rebecca, unused to the early rising of ranch life, was startled awake by the sounds of activity below her window. Dressing quickly in clothes Mrs. Simmons had provided a simple skirt and blouse that were slightly too large. She made her way downstairs to find the kitchen already bustling with activity. Mrs. Simmons was at the stove, cooking what appeared to be enough food for an army. A large table in the adjoining dining room was filled with ranch hands eating heartily before beginning their day's work. Among them, Rebecca spotted Xavier, who looked up as she entered and nodded in greeting. "Ah, you're up," Mrs. Simmons said, handing Rebecca an apron. "Make yourself useful, dear. These men eat like locusts." Rebecca tied the apron around her waist and fell into helping serve breakfast. It was simple work but kept her hands busy and her mind off her troubles. As the men finished eating and filed out to begin their day, Xavier lingered behind. "Sleep well?" he asked when there was finally a lull in the kitchen. "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Though it's strange to wake up in an unfamiliar place." "I know that feeling well," he replied. His blue eyes studied her face. "You look more at ease today." Rebecca smiled slightly. "It's amazing what a night's rest and distance from disaster can do." "Mr. Whittaker," Mr. Simmons called from the doorway, a stocky man with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes. "We're heading out to the north pasture." "Yes, sir," Xavier replied. To Rebecca he added, "Duty calls." "Perhaps we can talk more later," she nodded, watching as he followed Mr. Simmons outside. There was something compelling about Xavier Whittaker, a steadiness that had drawn her to trust him in her moment of crisis. "He's a good man," Mrs. Simmons commented, noting Rebecca's gaze. "Only been with us a short time, but Joseph says he's one of the best hands he's hired in years." "You know anything about him?" Rebecca asked, curious. "Where he's from?" Mrs. Simmons shook her head. "Men like him don't often volunteer their histories." "But he works hard," speaks respectfully, and keeps to himself. That's enough for us." She handed Rebecca a stack of plates to wash. "Now, let's get this kitchen in order, and then we need to talk about what comes next for you." The morning passed in a flurry of domestic chores. Rebecca found comfort in the routine tasks, so different from her life in town where she had spent her days helping at her father's store or attending to social obligations. By midday, the kitchen was spotless. Bread was baking in the oven, and vegetables from the garden had been prepared for the evening meal. "You're no stranger to hard work," Mrs. Simmons observed as they sat down for a light lunch. "That's good. Too many town girls would be useless in a place like this." "My mother believed in practical skills," Rebecca explained, "though she'll be frantic with worry by now." Mrs. Simmons regarded her thoughtfully. "You know, Joseph is riding into Leavenworth tomorrow for supplies. You could send a letter with him, let your family know you're safe." Rebecca considered this. "But not where I am." "That depends on whether you want to be found," Mrs. Simmons replied frankly. "What are your plans, Rebecca? Will you return to town and face the music, or are you looking for a fresh start?" It was the question Rebecca had been avoiding since her impulsive flight from the church. "I honestly don't know," she admitted. "The thought of returning to Leavenworth makes my stomach turn, but I can't hide forever." "No, you can't," Mrs. Simmons agreed. "But there's no rush either. Stay here a while. Work alongside me. Give yourself time to think clearly without everyone's expectations clouding your judgment." The offer was tempting. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." Mrs. Simmons waved away her concern. "We can always use another pair of hands, especially one attached to a bright mind. Joseph mentioned you kept books for your father. Our accounts could use organizing." And she added with a knowing smile, "If I'm not mistaken, a certain cowboy would be pleased to have you stay a while longer." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Whittaker was simply being kind to a woman in distress. "If you say so," Mrs. Simmons replied, clearly unconvinced. "Nevertheless, the offer stands. Stay as long as you need." That afternoon, Rebecca wrote a brief note to her parents explaining that she was safe and staying with respectable people outside of town. She promised to be in touch again soon but asked for time to gather her thoughts. She made no mention of Xavier or the Simmons ranch, unsure if she was ready for her family to find her just yet. As the sun began to set, the ranch hands returned from their day's work. Rebecca, now dressed in clothes that fit better after Mrs. Simmons had made some quick alterations, helped serve the evening meal. This time, Xavier sat at the end of the table closest to the kitchen, and their eyes met frequently as she moved about the room. After dinner, when the men had moved outside to enjoy pipes and conversation in the cool evening air, Xavier approached her as she finished clearing the table. "Would you care to take a walk, Miss Miller?" he asked. "The sunset is particularly fine from the rise behind the house." Rebecca glanced at Mrs. Simmons, who nodded encouragingly. "That sounds lovely," she agreed, untying her apron. They walked in companionable silence away from the house, following a worn path that led up a gentle slope. At the top, they could see for miles across the Kansas prairie, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and crimson. "It's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, the vastness of the view making her own troubles seem momentarily smaller. "It is," Xavier agreed, though when she turned, she found him looking at her rather than the sunset. "How are you truly doing, Miss Miller? Yesterday was eventful." Rebecca laughed softly at the understatement. "That's one way to put it. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. One moment I was about to become Mrs. Harold Whitmore, and the next I was fleeing town with a stranger." "Do you regret it?" he asked, his expression serious. She considered the question honestly. "No," she finally said. "It was reckless and probably scandalous, but I don't regret it. I would have suffocated under everyone's pity." She turned to face him fully. "But I am curious about you, Mr. Whitaker. What made you stop to help a crying woman in a wedding dress?" Xavier looked out over the prairie, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know what it's like to have your future disappear in an instant," he said quietly. "5 years ago, I had a farm in Missouri, a wife, plans for a family. Then came sickness, typhoid. I buried her and our unborn child in the same week." Rebecca's heart ached at the pain evident in his voice. "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, though the gesture couldn't mask the depth of his loss. "I sold the farm after that, couldn't bear to stay. Been drifting ever since, taking work where I can find it. When I saw you yesterday, looking like your world had ended." He trailed off, then met her eyes. "I guess I recognized something in you that I understood." "And that's why you said his loss my gain?" she asked softly. A smile touched Xavier's lips. "That was bold of me, wasn't it? But I meant it. Any man fool enough to walk away from a woman like you doesn't deserve a second thought." The directness of his words sent warmth spreading through Rebecca's chest. "You don't even know me, Mr. Whitaker." "I know enough," he replied simply. "I know you had the courage to walk away from everything familiar rather than accept a life that wasn't right for you. I know you've worked alongside Mrs. Simmons all day without complaint, despite being raised in town comfort. And I know that even in your lowest moment, there was a strength in you that caught my attention." Rebecca was speechless, moved by his perception and the gentle admiration in his voice. For a moment, they stood in silence as the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon. "It's getting dark," Xavier finally said. "We should head back." As they walked down the hill toward the warm lights of the ranch house, Rebecca found herself wondering if perhaps fate had a plan for her after all, one that included this quiet, thoughtful cowboy who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment. Days at the Simmons Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca rose with the sun, helped Mrs. Simmons prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, and spent her mornings attending to household tasks. In the afternoons, she began the work of organizing the ranch's accounts, discovering that years of haphazard bookkeeping had left them in considerable disarray. "Joseph is a fine rancher but hopeless with numbers," Mrs. Simmons confided as Rebecca established a proper ledger system. "You're doing us a greater service than you know." A week passed, then two. Rebecca sent another letter to her parents, still not revealing her whereabouts but assuring them of her safety and well-being. In return, Mr. Simmons brought back news from town. Harold Whitmore had left Leavenworth, reportedly for Kansas City, and Rebecca's parents were offering a reward for information about their daughter's whereabouts. "They're worried for you," Mrs. Simmons said gently as Rebecca absorbed this news. "Perhaps it's time to let them know where you are," Rebecca sighed. "Perhaps, but once they know, they'll come for me, and I'm not ready to go back yet." She looked around the kitchen that had become familiar territory. "I feel useful here, needed." What she didn't say was that returning to Leavenworth would mean giving up her daily interactions with Xavier. Their evening walks had become a ritual, a time when they could speak freely away from the curious eyes of the ranch. He told her stories of his travels since leaving Missouri, and she shared memories of growing up in Leavenworth. Each evening, she learned something new about him: his fondness for reading when he could get books, his skill with horses, his dry humor that emerged more often as they grew comfortable with each other. It was on one such walk, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival at the ranch, that Xavier stopped beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree and turned to face her. "I've been thinking, Miss Miller," he began, his usual composure seeming slightly shaken. "It's probably time for me to move on from the Simmons Ranch." Rebecca felt her heart sink. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "Mr. Simmons only needed extra hands through the spring calving season. That work's nearly done. Where will you go?" she asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. That depends, Xavier replied, taking a step closer to her. On you. Rebecca's breath caught. On me. These past weeks getting to know you. He paused, searching for words. Rebecca, I know it's soon after your broken engagement. I know we've only known each other a short time, but I find myself thinking about you constantly, about what might be possible between us. Her heart was pounding now. What are you saying, Xavier? It was the first time she had used his first name, and his eyes warmed at the sound of it. I'm saying that I care for you, deeply, and I'm wondering if you might consider a future that includes me. Are you proposing? Rebecca asked, astonished. Xavier laughed softly. Not yet. That would be presumptuous, given everything you've been through. But I am asking if you'd be willing to let me court you properly, to see where this feeling between us might lead. Relief and joy mingled in Rebecca's chest. Yes, she said without hesitation. I would like that very much. His smile was radiant in the fading light. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Xavier leaned in and brushed his lips against hers in a gentle kiss. It was brief but perfect, a promise of more to come. I should tell you, he said as they walked back to the ranch hand in hand, that I've been saving to buy land again. Not in Missouri, the memories there are too painful, but perhaps here in Kansas, a small ranch of my own. That sounds wonderful, Rebecca replied, imagining what such a life might be like. So different from the future she had planned with Harold, yet somehow more appealing than the town life she had always known. The next morning, as Rebecca helped with breakfast preparations, Mrs. Simmons watched her with knowing eyes. Something's changed, she observed. You're practically glowing this morning. Rebecca couldn't suppress her smile. Xavier has asked to court me. Mrs. Simmons nodded, unsurprised. About time. Joseph and I have had a wager on how long it would take him to speak up. Her expression grew more serious. But Rebecca, you need to consider what this means. Your parents, your life in town. I know, Rebecca acknowledged. It's complicated, but when I'm with Xavier, everything feels right in a way it never did with Harold. Then you should follow your heart, Mrs. Simmons advised. But first, you need to face your past. Your parents deserve to know you're safe, to see you in person. Rebecca knew she was right. I'll go into town with Mr. Simmons next time he goes for supplies. It's time I stopped hiding. The decision made, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That evening she told Xavier of her plans. I'll go with you, he immediately offered. You shouldn't have to face them alone. Rebecca squeezed his hand gratefully. Thank you, but this is something I need to do myself. I ran away from my problems once already. It's time I stood on my own 2 feet. 2 days later, Rebecca found herself seated beside Mr. Simmons in his wagon, heading toward Leavenworth. She was dressed in her best borrowed clothes, her hair neatly arranged, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Nervous. Mr. Simmons asked as the town came into view. Terrified, she admitted. I have no idea what reception awaits me. Remember, you have a place with us regardless of what happens today, he assured her. Mrs. Simmons would be devastated to lose her new assistant. His kindness bolstered her courage. As they drove down the main street of Leavenworth, Rebecca felt the stares of townspeople who recognized her. Whispers followed the wagon, and she held her head high, refusing to shrink under their scrutiny. Mr. Simmons let her off at her parents' home, a tidy 2-story house near the town center. I'll finish my errands and meet you back here in 2 hours, he said. Unless you want me to wait. No, that's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Simmons. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca walked up the familiar path to her childhood home and knocked on the door. After a moment, it swung open to reveal her mother, who stared at her as if seeing a ghost. Rebecca, she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Hello, Mother, Rebecca replied, forcing a smile. May I come in? What followed was a flurry of tears, exclamations, and her father being summoned from the store. There were recriminations about the worry she had caused them, questions about where she had been, and horror at the thought that she had left town with a stranger. "You have any idea what people have been saying?" her mother demanded, once the initial shock had passed. "That you ran off with some drifter. The scandal has been unbearable." "I'm sorry for worrying you," Rebecca said sincerely, "but I'm not sorry I left. I couldn't face everyone after what Harold did." "Harold has been telling people you had cold feet," her father informed her grimly. "That he tried to talk you into going through with the wedding, but you panicked and fled." Anger flashed through Rebecca at this revision of events. "That's a lie. He left me standing at the altar." "It doesn't matter now," her mother sighed. "What matters is that you're home. We can start rebuilding your reputation." "Perhaps in time." "I'm not staying, Mother," Rebecca interrupted gently. Her parents stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, not staying?" her father demanded. "Of course you're staying. This is your home." Rebecca shook her head. "I've been living and working at a ranch outside town. The people there have been kind to me. I've found purpose there." And she hesitated, then continued firmly, "I've met someone." The explosion that followed was predictable. Her mother wept, her father paced and railed against her foolishness. They pleaded, they threatened to disown her, they tried to make her see reason. Through it all, Rebecca remained calm. "I'm 23 years old," she reminded them. "Old enough to make my own choices, even if they're not the ones you would make for me." "Is it that cowboy?" her father finally asked, his voice tight with anger. "The one people saw you leaving town with." "His name is Xavier Whittaker," Rebecca confirmed. "And yes, we've grown close. He's a good man." "A drifter," her mother scoffed tearfully, "with no prospects, no family name." "He has plans to buy his own ranch," Rebecca defended him. "And he has shown me more respect and kindness in 3 weeks than Harold did in our entire courtship." The argument continued, but eventually, exhausted and seeing that their daughter would not be swayed, her parents relented enough to extract a promise that she would visit again soon and that they could meet this man who had captured her heart. "I'll bring him next time," Rebecca promised. "You'll see then what I see in him." When Mr. Simmons returned to collect her, Rebecca was emotionally drained but resolute. Her parents stood on the porch, watching her go with worried expressions. "How did it go?" Mr. Simmons asked as they drove away. "About as well as could be expected," Rebecca sighed. "They're unhappy with my choices, but they'll come around in time." As they left Leavenworth behind, Rebecca felt a curious sense of closure. She had faced her past and, though bruised by the confrontation, had emerged with her determination intact. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, it was a path entirely of her own choosing. Xavier was waiting anxiously when they returned to the ranch, his relief evident when he saw Rebecca step down from the wagon. "You're back," he said, coming forward to help her down. "I've been worried all day." His concern warmed her. It was difficult, she admitted, but necessary. "And I've promised to bring you to meet them soon." Xavier looked slightly alarmed at this prospect, making Rebecca laugh. "Don't worry, they don't bite. Much." That evening, they took their usual walk to the ridge, where Xavier surprised her with a blanket spread on the ground and a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and wine. "Mrs. Simmons helped," he confessed as they settled onto the blanket. "I wanted to celebrate your courage today." Under the vast Kansas sky, they shared the food and talked of the future Xavier's plans for land, Rebecca's hopes of reconciling with her parents, the life they might build together if things continued on their current path. As stars began to appear overhead, Xavier took her hand. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," he said, suddenly serious. "Mr. Adams, who owns the property adjoining the Simmons Ranch to the east, is looking to sell. 200 acres with a small house and stable already built." Rebecca's heart quickened. "Are you thinking of buying it?" Xavier nodded. I've saved enough for a down payment. The rest I could earn over time." He paused, his eyes finding hers in the gathering darkness. "It would be a modest beginning, but it could be a home. Our home, if you wanted it to be." The implication was clear. "Xavier Whittaker," Rebecca said softly, "are you proposing to me on our very first official courtship outing?" He smiled, though there was nervousness behind it. "I suppose I am." "Too soon." "Not for me," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "But what about you? Are you sure you're ready? After your wife?" Xavier's expression grew solemn. "I will always carry Sarah in my heart, but loving her doesn't mean I can't love again." He cupped Rebecca's cheek gently. "Meeting you that day outside the church, it woke something in me I thought had died with her. The capacity to imagine a future with someone by my side again." Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Xavier Whittaker." His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally broke apart, Xavier reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver ring. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it was my mother's. I've carried it with me all these years." As he slipped it onto her finger, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from her previous engagement. "It's perfect," she assured him. "Everything about this is perfect." The next morning, they announced their engagement to the Simmons, who received the news with genuine delight. Mrs. Simmons immediately began planning a small celebration. While Mr. Simmons offered to speak to Adams about the land, Xavier was interested in purchasing. "Let me handle the negotiations," he insisted. "Might get you a better price if he thinks I'm the one buying." Over the following weeks, pieces of their future fell into place with surprising speed. Adams accepted Xavier's offer on the land. Mr. Simmons helped arrange financing with the bank, and work began on expanding the small house to make it more suitable for a family. Rebecca rode into Leavenworth again, this time with Xavier at her side, to share their news with her parents. The meeting was tense but civil. Her father questioned Xavier extensively about his plans and finances, while her mother assessed him with a critical eye that gradually softened as she observed his obvious devotion to her daughter. "He's not what we would have chosen for you," her father said privately to Rebecca before they left. "But he seems honorable, and you look happier than I've seen you in a long time." It wasn't a wholehearted blessing, but it was acceptance, and for now, that was enough. As summer progressed into fall, Rebecca divided her time between helping Mrs. Simmons, working on preparations for her new home, and occasional visits to town to mend fences with old friends. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged. Harold's family, in particular, remained coldly hostile, but others proved more resilient than she had feared. The wedding was set for October, when the harvest would be in and the weather still mild. Unlike her elaborate planned ceremony with Harold, Rebecca wanted something simple and meaningful. They would marry at the Simmons Ranch, with a small gathering of friends and family. "Are you sure you don't want a church wedding?" Xavier asked as they discussed the arrangements one evening. "I don't want you to feel you're settling for less than you deserve." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "My last church wedding didn't exactly go as planned. Besides, the ranch feels right. It's where we found each other, where we're building our future." As the wedding day approached, Rebecca was struck by how different her feelings were this time. Where there had been anxiety and doubt before her wedding to Harold, now there was only certainty and joy. Xavier was everything Harold was not: steady, honest, and utterly devoted to her happiness. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and cool, a perfect fall day. Rebecca dressed in a new gown of cream-colored silk, simple but elegant, while Mrs. Simmons fussed around her, arranging her hair and adding final touches. "Something borrowed," the older woman said, fastening a delicate pearl pendant around Rebecca's neck. "It was my mother's." Rebecca touched it gently. It's beautiful. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Simmons. I don't know what would have become of me if you hadn't taken me in that day. Mrs. Simmons smiled, tears in her eyes. You would have found your way, dear. You're stronger than you knew. She squeezed Rebecca's hands. Now, let's not keep that fine man waiting. He's been pacing the yard since dawn. Outside, the ranch had been transformed. Chairs were arranged in rows facing an arch decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. The guests, a mix of ranch hands, neighbors, Rebecca's family, and a few friends from town, turned as she appeared in the doorway, her father waiting to escort her. But it was Xavier she sought in the crowd, finding him standing tall and handsome at the front, dressed in a new suit, his eyes fixed on her with such love that Rebecca's heart nearly burst with happiness. As her father led her down the makeshift aisle, Rebecca thought of that day in May when another wedding had ended before it began. What had seemed like the worst moment of her life had, by some miracle, led her to the best decision she had ever made. When they reached Xavier, her father placed her hand in his, a symbolic gesture of blessing that meant more than words could express. The minister, brought in from a neighboring town, smiled at the couple before him as he began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. The words were traditional, but to Rebecca, they felt entirely new. When it came time for their vows, Xavier's voice was steady and sure, his promises of love and faithfulness ringing with sincerity. Rebecca spoke her own vows clearly, meaning every word with a certainty she had never felt before. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Xavier's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, sealing their commitment before their community of friends and family. As they turned to face their guests, now as Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, the applause and cheers washed over them like a blessing. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Simmons and the neighboring women. There was music from a local fiddler, dancing, and plenty of good-natured teasing of the newlyweds. Rebecca's parents, still adjusting to their daughter's new life, nevertheless made an effort to join in the festivities. Her mother even grudgingly admitted that the simplicity of the occasion had a charm that couldn't be denied. As evening fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Xavier took Rebecca's hand and led her away from the celebration for a moment of privacy. Happy, Mrs. Whitaker? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Blissfully, she replied, leaning into his embrace. Though it still seems incredible that we're here married after how we met, Xavier chuckled. When I rode into Leavenworth that day, I was just looking for work. I never expected to find a wife, especially not one in a wedding dress running from another man's ceremony. His loss, Rebecca quoted with a smile. My gain, Xavier completed, kissing her softly. The greatest gain of my life. Late that night, after the last guests had departed and they had retired to the small cabin on their new property, Rebecca stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit land that was now their home. Xavier came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her. What are you thinking about? He asked, pressing a kiss to her shoulder. How life takes such unexpected turns, she replied. 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my future held. Now look at us, everything is different and infinitely better than I could have imagined. Xavier turned her in his arms. No regrets, then? Not a single one, Rebecca assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him deeply. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. In the months that followed, Rebecca and Xavier settled into married life with a happiness that seemed to grow deeper with each passing day. Their small house became a home as they added personal touches, curtains Rebecca sewed herself, furniture Xavier crafted in the evenings, books they read together by lamplight during the long winter nights. Spring brought new beginnings. Xavier's small herd of cattle began to grow, and Rebecca planted a garden that promised summer bounty. They worked side by side, learning the rhythms of ranch life together. It wasn't always easy. There were storms that damaged fences, a worrying illness that swept through the cattle, and the thousand small challenges that came with building a life from the ground up. But through it all, they faced each obstacle as partners, their bond strengthening with each challenge overcome. Rebecca discovered resources of strength and resilience within herself that she hadn't known existed. Xavier, no longer the solitary drifter, flourished with Rebecca by his side, his natural leadership and hard work earning the respect of neighboring ranchers. Summer came again, marking a year since Rebecca had fled her wedding to Harold. The anniversary might have passed unnoticed if not for a letter that arrived from Leavenworth, carried by a ranch hand returning from town. "It's from my mother," Rebecca said, breaking the seal. Her relationship with her parents had improved gradually over the months, with occasional visits in both directions helping to heal old wounds. As she read, her expression shifted from curiosity to surprise. "What is it?" Xavier asked, setting aside the ledger he'd been reviewing. "Harold Whitmore is getting married again," Rebecca replied. "To Eliza Thompson, the banker's daughter from the next county. Mother says the wedding is next month and the whole town is talking about it." Xavier studied her face. "How do you feel about that?" Rebecca considered the question honestly. "Happy for him, I suppose, and grateful." "Grateful?" Xavier raised an eyebrow. "If he hadn't left me at the altar that day, I would never have run from the church, never have met you." She set the letter aside and moved to sit beside her husband. "I would have married a man who didn't truly love me and missed discovering what real happiness feels like." Xavier pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "His loss, your gain," Rebecca finished with a smile. "Our gain." As summer turned to fall once more, their joy was multiplied by the news that Rebecca was expecting their first child, due in the early spring. The prospect of parenthood brought both excitement and a touch of anxiety, especially for Xavier, who remembered all too vividly the tragedy of his first wife's pregnancy. "Everything will be fine," Rebecca assured him, though she understood his fears. "Dr. Mason says I'm as healthy as can be." They prepared for the baby's arrival with careful planning. Xavier added a nursery to their home, working through the winter months to create a perfect space for their child. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes and blankets, storing them in the chest Xavier had built. Mrs. Simmons, who had become like a mother to Rebecca during their time together, visited frequently, offering advice and support. "You two will be wonderful parents," she declared confidently. "That child is blessed to be born into such love." Rebecca's parents, finally reconciled to their daughter's choice of life and husband, planned an extended visit for after the birth. Even her father, initially so disapproving of Xavier, had gradually come to respect his son-in-law's integrity and work ethic. "Never thought I'd see the day when Richard Miller would offer me business advice," Xavier remarked after one surprisingly pleasant visit. "I believe your father has finally decided I'm not going to ruin you after all." The winter passed with anxious anticipation. Their small ranch prospered despite the harsh weather, with careful management and hard work paying dividends. By early spring, they were in a comfortable position financially, with plans to expand their operations in the coming year. In March of 1880, after a long night that tested both their endurance, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas Joseph Whitaker, in honor of Mr. Simmons, who had been such a steadfast supporter of their life together. Xavier, who had paced anxiously outside the bedroom during the birth, was transformed the moment the midwife placed his son in his arms. The fear that had haunted him throughout Rebecca's pregnancy melted away as he gazed down at the tiny face that somehow combined the best features of both his parents. He's perfect, he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Rebecca, exhausted but radiant, watched the two most important people in her world with overwhelming love. He is, she agreed, and he's ours. The years that followed brought changes and growth to the Whitaker family and their ranch. Thomas was joined by a sister, Sarah Elizabeth, named for Xavier's first wife and Rebecca's grandmother, 2 years later. The children thrived in the freedom of ranch life, learning early the values of hard work and family unity that their parents held dear. The ranch expanded as Xavier's breeding program gained recognition throughout the region. What had begun as a modest operation grew into a respected enterprise, with Xavier's expertise sought by other ranchers and his cattle bringing top prices at market. Rebecca, not content to be solely a wife and mother, established a small school on their property for their children and those of neighboring ranches. Her practical education approach, combining academic subjects with useful skills, earned praise from families grateful for the opportunity for their children to learn without traveling great distances to town. Life wasn't without its hardships. There were dry years when crops failed, harsh winters that threatened their livestock, and the normal challenges of raising children in a frontier environment. But through it all, Rebecca and Xavier faced each difficulty together, their partnership only strengthening with time. In the spring of 1888, 10 years after that fateful day when Rebecca's first wedding had been called off, they hosted a gathering at their ranch to celebrate the anniversary of their life together. Friends from miles around joined them, including the aging Simmons couple who had played such a crucial role in their story. As twilight fell and their guests enjoyed music and dancing in the large barn Xavier had built years earlier, Rebecca slipped away to the ridge where they had become engaged so long ago. Xavier, sensing her absence, found her there moments later, reminiscing. He asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Rebecca leaned into him. Thinking about how differently everything could have turned out, one moment changed the entire course of our lives. "Are you still glad?" Xavier asked, though after 10 years of marriage he knew the answer. "More than ever," she assured him, turning in his arms. At 33, Rebecca retained the beauty that had first caught Xavier's attention, though the years of sun and laughter had left their marks. To Xavier, now 42 with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, she was more beautiful than the day they met. "You know," he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes, "I never did thank Harold Whitmore properly for being fool enough to leave you at the altar." Rebecca laughed. "I heard he's quite successful in Kansas City now. 3 children, from what Mother writes." "Good for him," Xavier said sincerely, "but I still got the better end of that bargain." From the barn, they could hear their children's laughter mingling with the music and voices of their friends and neighbors. Their home was filled with joy, their land productive, their life together everything they had hoped for and more. "His loss," Rebecca said softly, standing on tiptoe to kiss her husband in the fading light. "My gain," Xavier completed, drawing her closer. "Our gain, for all the years to come." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the celebration, back toward the life they had built together from an unexpected beginning. Behind them, the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant hues of promise fulfilled, and dreams realized a fitting backdrop for a love story that had begun with heartbreak but found its way to lasting joy.